everybody.
Hey, Brian Rasnick is on.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good, how are you? So I'm coming up as a phone number. It'll probably be 239-595-0467.
I see that one. Yep, thank you.
Okay.
Dave, I like your background. That's really
Thank
cool.
you. It's where I would like to be right now.
Cindy, this is Brian. I didn't get an agenda today. I got the PowerPoint presentation. Who's our guest speaker today?
We don't have a guest speaker today. We're going to, the homework that was sent out was to just look at that PowerPoint from the task force meeting and
Yep.
To look at the governor's plan. And so today was just to talk about any recommendations you might have around that, and particularly the kind of impact that it might have on the strategic plan as we move forward.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
Hi, Julie.
Good evening. Cindy, are we waiting for a few more people?
Right now, we don't have very many on. Mrs. Morgan is not on yet, so let's give it a minute or two. I know it's
Okay.
6:01. Maybe we'll just wait a couple of minutes and see. And in the meantime, I will look and see how many we had respond that were actually planning to attend. Said we had 7 accepted, 1 declined. That leaves us with 4 or 3 that didn't respond at all.
Just let me know when you want me to start, Cindy.
Okay, I was looking to see if Mrs. Morgan had responded. I believe Jason Grabowski was the person who had declined. Just trying to, my tracking doesn't want to pop up. She accepted. Well, why don't you go ahead and begin, and if she pops in, then we can pause wherever we are and let her go ahead and do her update.
Okay, sounds good. Welcome, everyone. We'll skip over the board member report until Mrs. Morgan's able to join us, and we can start with approval of the agenda. So can I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I'll make the motion, Bill Ribble.
Thank you, Bill. A second? It's going to have to be you, Dave, if you want to. Unless Brian wants to do it. Okay. All in favor of approving tonight's agenda, say aye or raise your hand or do something so Julie knows that we approved. I don't think we have any abstentions or, no, that was everybody. Okay, now we need.
I'm sorry, we had 2 more in the waiting room, and Mrs. Morgan is one of those.
Perfect. Okay, do you want to just real quick entertain a motion to approve the minutes from May 13th, and then we can jump back to Mrs. Morgan's board report. Does anybody want to make a motion to approve the minutes from May 13th?
David Stone.
Julie, did you get that? Okay. All in favor of approving the May 13th minutes, say aye or raise your hand or do something so Julie knows we're approving. Anybody abstaining or nay? Perfect. Okay, so Mrs. Morgan is here, so we will bump back to the board member report.
Oh, did I miss? I'm late. I'm sorry.
You didn't miss very much. All we did is approve the agenda and the minutes from May 13th.
We just started.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I don't have a lot to report. I know that what everybody is most interested in is, when are we reopening schools and how will we reopen schools? And I can tell you that the governor issued very general guidelines with the intent that local school districts make most of the decisions that meet the needs of their families, students, and faculty. So it is the intention of the district to develop a format for opening schools. Are you presenting this tonight, Cindy?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So let me just say as you watch this that the intent is to continually update what they're working on with respect to CDC guidelines that are being followed by and recommended by local health officials. So it's going to be a work in progress right up until school starts. What else can I tell you about it? Just imagine that you're opening you're opening K-6 and you're going to have classrooms empty with desks, all material, and that's it, the teacher and students, nothing else will be in the classroom, all papers collected at the end of the day and disposed of. That's going to be very traumatic, I think, for some kids. And so what they're trying to do as they go through this process is really take kids at different levels and say, okay, when you get to school, are we going to have to take your temperature? Are you going to have to wear a mask? Are you going to be in your classroom all day? What is it like for that child? And what are we going to have to do to support that child in that context? And I think everybody recognizes that at the elementary level, there's going to be a lot more support required than there will be for the other kids. Anyway, just lots of transportation. How do you transport a full class? Or I shouldn't say a full class. What do you do with a bus that used to be full and now has to be half full? Do you run your buses twice a day? I mean, 8 times a day, whatever. So anyway, I think this will be an interesting presentation for you. I think you will have a ton of questions. I hope you looked at the task force briefing because I think there was a lot of great material there. So I'm going to turn it back over to Cindy unless anybody has questions.
Okay, and in terms of actually presenting, I should back up and say everyone already received the presentation, the
Right.
PowerPoint,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
watched the
really.
presentation hopefully on the task force. So I'm not going to re-present that information. But what
Yeah,
I will do is give you just a little bit of an update, which is basically what Mrs. Morgan just said. This team has been working nonstop, just trying to basically read a crystal ball and say, so what's it going to look like in August? Because we have no idea what it's going to look like in August. So today, as a matter of fact, I was in a meeting with teams all day today that were looking at just those pieces that Mrs. Morgan was talking about. What is the day in the life of a typical student going to look like this fall? And is it going to be the same pre-K through 12? Or are we going to have differences between elementary and middle and high school? And what are those recommendations? And right now, no decisions have been made. And our community is very divided. Within 48 hours of that task force meeting, there were over 100 emails that came into the Reopening Schools task force mailbox. And they ranged everywhere from, we're ready to start today, you should have gone back to school, you know, after spring break, to don't reopen until we have a vaccine, and everywhere in between.
Mhm.
And really it's very, very evenly split. It's, you know, there's not a huge movement one way or the other within our district. Now that's different in other districts. In Miami-Dade, they're very much against reopening. Their community is very much against reopening because they have right now, or still have some very high numbers. We have seen an increase in the number of people in the past week saying we need to take it slow because, as you know, our numbers are increasing. So, you know, there's a lot going into these decisions. I wish you would have answers tonight, but you won't. So, but what we would like to do tonight is hear your input. Normally, these committees do not meet over the summer, and it is a board advisory committee, but it was actually the superintendent who requested the input from these committees because he wants to make sure that we hear from as many of our stakeholders as possible. And with that, he said, if each committee could kind of focus on their area of expertise, and this committee's area of expertise is the strategic plan. So if you could look at it, and obviously you can make any comments you want, but we are going to also ask you to focus a little bit on what kind of an impact is this going to have on our strategic plan? Because, you know, again, we don't know. If we just look at the impact it's already had on our strategic plan, all of Objective 1, increasing student achievement, all of our measures were around standardized testing, which did not occur. So, you know, so those goals obviously were not met because, well, they may have been met, but we have no way of documenting whether or not those goals were met. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the next 3 months. So that said, I think we have a lot of comments that are going to want to be said. So I'd like to set up just a little bit of a protocol. If you go to the participants button, you'll see that you have a way to raise your hand, and then a little blue hand will show up, and hopefully I have it open. Hopefully I will see them, and they should be kept in order. And in the interest of staying within an amount of time, if everyone could have a comment, and then everybody have a turn to comment at least once, and then we can go around again if you have additional things. So we'll start with just some general ones, and then if you have specific things that you want to address to the strategic plan. I'm going to pop up the strategic plan just to show you very quickly those 4 areas. Well, it's frozen. Okay, so while we're waiting for that to unfreeze, I see that Dr. Stork has her hand up, so we'll start with her.
Thanks, Cindy. I actually did have an opportunity to watch the task force meeting. I took a look at the CARES document, the PDF that you sent out, specifically the pages that you asked us to look at. And I also took a look at the PowerPoint. So I feel like I got a good handle. Actually, right before the meeting was reviewing Envision 2030 just to make sure I had a good understanding of what you were asking. But I did have a couple of questions based on all of that material that you sent out. The first one has to do with training for staff and students. So this comes from the CARES document that was sent out. So it's my understanding that districts are going to have to come up with some kind of plan based on what's in that CARES document, outlining how they're going to train staff and then how they're going to train students to be aware of some of the considerations regarding safety and health and protocols and all that stuff. So I just wanted to get a little bit more information about how that would take place, because we are midway through June. So developing a training plan for staff and students seems like a big task between now and the start of school. The other questions I had, which this does relate to the strategic plan, has to do, I saw this on page 52 of the CARES document, the communication recommendations. So I thought that maybe this committee might kind of, since we've already sort of embraced that topic in previous meetings, communication, we might want to focus on that a little bit in terms of how the district communicates their recommendations, the plans that they're making, all of that, which is another huge task. And the funding. So one of the things that I didn't really get a good grasp of with the materials that were sent to me is how the district is going to fund some of this stuff based on the CARES Act. And I know that that's a huge challenge and that's a big question, but obviously a lot of where this funding, or if this funding will come, is going to impact the strategic plan and the things that are in the strategic plan. So for example, I do know that one of the funding pieces that the governor has mentioned has to do with career and technical education. That's in our strategic plan, but you know, is that chunk of money feasible to use for that right now, or do we need to think about other ways to use that? So those are some of my questions, and I'll shut off now so that other people can ask their questions too.
And just let me back up and say, I don't have those answers. If there is some that I do have, or at least know what they're working on, I'll let you know. But what Julie, as our wonderful secretary, she'll be keeping lists of those. Also, I can enable chat so that if you have questions that we don't get to, you can put those in the chat box so that we have a chance to do those. Oh, and you know what? We were supposed to automatically record. Let me make sure that we are automatically recording. Yes, we are. Oh, good. Okay. So we'll do that as well. You did mention the training, and I know that they are working on that. For the administrators, for district leadership, the training date is August 23rd, when they'll have a get together. We don't know whether it'll be in person at this point, but it'll be kind of a nuts and bolts meeting of this is everything that you need to know going in. Here are the procedures that are being recommended. You know, now as far as the student training and the teacher training, that's still being worked on too.
Okay.
Right.
And the other piece of the communication that I just took a look at my notes really quick is there was a chart that you had up in the PDF that was also part of the task force meeting about the difference between English speakers and people who don't speak English in terms of how they felt about opening school with or without some kind of considerations. And so I thought that maybe that could also be part of our communication conversation. Maybe that's something that we could focus on in this committee, is how we communicate that to people who are not native English speakers.
Great idea. Thank you. Okay. I don't see any hands. Who would like to speak next?
Oh, I got a hand. Here's my hand.
Here. Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's not showing up. Thank you, Ms. Ribble. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to respond to Dr. Stort's question about funding and money. I was on the, as I try to get on every Tuesday, the Lee County Commissioners meeting. And the more I'm on these conference calls with the mayors and the commissioner calls, I'm led to believe that there's money out there that we can still ask for some of these shortfalls. And I would rather ask sooner than later to be considered if we have a good request and a good business plan for the need for those funds. That might be an avenue that we want to pursue.
Okay, and Julie, would you make note of that as we come to the end? I'm going to ask for recommendations, and that could be a recommendation that we consider making. Thank you. Mrs. Morgan.
She's still on mute.
Yes, I'm trying to unmute her there.
Okay.
All right, let's try. Okay. So, Bill, is that CARES money coming to the county that you're talking about making more requests, or are you talking about what the governor has already divvied up into line items for school districts?
I'm saying that from what I'm understanding now, there's buckets in both areas that we could ask for funding from the state and that's through the Florida League of Cities and as well as through the county.
Okay. I'm going to have to get more information on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Dave.
So I had a couple questions about the hybrid models. One of the things I was looking at was the accommodations for ESE and ELL and 504, spending more time face-to-face. Is there possibility of a rush of parents trying to get their kids evaluated for it? That's something that crossed my mind, is there might be a ton of parents wanting to set up IEP meetings for kids that may not already have IEPs. Has that been thought of?
I would guess that they have been thinking of that, mainly because we expect there to be a drop in, a gap based on, we always have that summer loss, and we expect that to be greater. So I'm guessing that that has been, but we'll certainly make note of that.
Okay.
Right now, the plan is that all ESE students that do have a plan would be every day face-to-face.
Okay, which is good. Also regarding the, I know there was talk about we have the kids alternate day to day or week to week. What are they going to use to make the determination for which path they're going to take with that?
Well, they're listening to input from groups like this. They're looking at transportation, what would that mean transportation-wise? They're also looking at, do we come back everybody all day, every day? So honestly, it's going to boil down to where are we when that decision has to be made? And then what are the financial implications of each one? And most importantly, which one do we think will really give the best education to the students? And at the same time protect them as much as possible. So that all of those things are being considered. That's why it's taking so long.
Yeah, so there's a lot to consider.
Yeah, there's a lot of things.
And another thing, I guess it's more of not a question so much as just observations, because I was watching some of the task force meeting with my kids, and I kind of asked them a bit, how do you feel about going alternate days? How do you feel about going alternate weeks? And, they, for different reasons, they seem to gravitate towards the different directions.
Mm-hmm.
My high schooler who's going into his junior year said he felt more comfortable going week to week because it would be more of a sense of continuity during the course of a given week. Spending a week at school and then spending a week at home. But then my middle schooler who's going into 7th grade, she said that the alternating by day is a lot more familiar because it's a lot more like the block scheduling that they already do.
Right.
So those are, I'm just kind of throwing in there just from my own conversations with my kids about that.
That's interesting because Collier County does not use the block program, and they have made the decision that they are going hybrid AB schedule. At least that was what they said today. Whether that's a final decision or not, I don't know. But it's very difficult for them because they're not on a block schedule, so it's going to be more difficult. So right now that is playing in our favor.
Awesome.
Dr. Stork, did I see your hand go back up?
You did. I just found a couple more. I have this whole big page of notes that I took when I was going through that material. So I'm finding my hidden comments here and there. Another question I had, which was mentioned, I think, in the task force meeting, but I'm not sure I caught exactly what the plan was for the models where, this is particularly related to elementary, where the kids are in with the teacher and they're rotating the specials teachers in and out and having the teacher do recess and all that stuff. I know there was mention of the way that they're going to be able to give the teachers their contractual breaks and all of that. But I do have some concerns, which probably have been shared by other instructional staff, of how that might look in a practical sense for an elementary teacher, for example, who's spending, from the morning until the afternoon with their children without any breaks, including recess and all of that stuff. So I did have some concerns about how that plan might work. And also to talk about the idea of the funding for the supplies that are going to be needed for the classroom cleaning. So I did hear the conversation about the protocols and all of that, but is there going to be a special fund set aside specifically for teachers in the classroom who need those types of supplies already?
That was actually discussed today, and they're trying to figure out what is actually needed, how much of it is needed, and can we get it? For example, there was a long discussion around hand sanitizers. So where do we put them? And don't quote me, but I believe the number I heard for one of those large bottles was like $75. And, which you start adding that up with 100 schools and multiple locations within each school. And then can we even get it? So the supplies are running so low. So there is money it's being considered within that overall budget, but every single consideration has a big price tag attached to it. When we look at it, so it's a lot of it will depend on what model we're using, a lot of it will depend on what type of transportation, and then what safety protocols are finally put in place as a decision. If masks are encouraged but not required, that will require, that's a different thing than if we're requiring masks. Well, if we're requiring masks, do we need to provide masks? So lots of budget considerations there.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
It seems overwhelming, right? It just seems really overwhelming. The last question I had to do with what, has there been any conversation about what will happen if things change? So assuming you have a plan in place July 1st or July 15th, what happens if the numbers in the state continue to rise and there's a change in a reopening plan, for example? Then what happens?
Well, that's one thing they're working on, is making the plans as agile as possible. So there's always the option of going to full virtual. We did that. We know we can do that. So if an agency says you have to close, or if as a district we decide that it's in the best interest of students that we need to close, then we always have that option of going back. And hopefully we've learned some lessons from this time, so it will be even better the next time around. So that is definitely in the back of everyone's mind as they're making these plans, is what if, what happens if we do this? We know that there will be some parents who will not be ready to send their children back. Even if we were to say we're going to open full blast, there'll be some people who would say, well, you go right ahead, but I'm not. And so we're looking at options for likely virtual. So in making sure that we have enough teachers for that. And that again requires training. And so, yeah, everything is like a domino effect. You make one decision and there's 14 more that need to be made.
So I'm sure you're going to ask the committee this, but I wanted to just pose it to the people that are here also, is are y'all comfortable kind of focusing on one area that is in the strategic plan to make any recommendations? I had mentioned communication, but there might be some other areas that you all are thinking about with regard to the strategic plan and the reopening that you might want to focus on.
Cindy, this is Brian.
Yes.
I've had my hand up for the last 10 minutes and nobody could see it, but that's probably my fault.
Can't see a thing, sorry.
Yeah, but my neighbors are starting to wonder what's going on looking through the windows. So I have two questions. My first question is, has the school board and the task committee discussed how they're going to communicate, or if they're going to communicate to other people within the school if a teacher and or a student test positive for COVID-19 once school has started? So is there a plan in action to notify everybody, so students or families that may have immune system issues or stuff like that can pull their kid out of school at that point if somebody's tested positive?
Yeah, the details of that are being worked out, but right now the first protocol is that we contact Beth within our department, within our district. She contacts the health department, and it is the health department that actually is in charge of, I'm going to call it contact tracing, but it's not necessarily contact tracing, but looking at, okay, what was the exposure? Who needs to be contacted? Who needs to be contacted like right now? Who needs to be advised that they need to quarantine? And all of that is under the purview of the health department.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then the other question would be, how are they going to be testing the healthy students and staff? Are we planning on temperature checks every morning or when they leave? Have we thought about that?
Yes, again, no final decisions have been made, but right now the draft plan is that students would have a temperature check when they arrive at the school site. Anyone with a temperature of 100.4 or higher would be isolated and parents called to pick them up. And then that would default into the protocol for when they were allowed to return. We have a checklist of symptoms, including like the dry cough, the fever, obviously, aches. I mean, depending on whose list you look at, it can go anywhere from 4 to 10 or so symptoms. Right now, the protocol is out for 10 days, the last 3 of which need to have had no fever or take a COVID test. And if it comes back negative, if you're willing to share the negative results, then you can return immediately. Again,
Okay.
that's a draft.
And for the record, since we seem to be taking a poll, my 2 high schoolers would rather have every other day, kind of like Collier is doing it, versus every other week.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Balcom, we haven't heard from you. Do you have any comments?
Not at this point. I'm sorry I didn't get to watch the task force meeting the other night. We've been managing a lot of the resource grants that the county's been using some of those funds for. So it's been a few late nights and stuff like that. But just trying to follow along and stay informed. It sounds like everything's moving forward. I'll read the minutes and try and contribute a little better next time.
That's fine. Thank you. Just want to make sure everyone had a chance. Mr. Freed.
No, I appreciate it. And speaking of the funds that the county received, I do know that there's, they're looking at additional uses for them. There's an awful lot of things. Right now the 3 programs that we have active is an individual assistance program for people that have been laid off or lost their jobs or income due to the COVID, and then a small business grant program for businesses that were forced to close by the governor's executive safer at home order. And then we have a food pantry, food security program to help fund the 100 and something food pantries that work with Harry Chapin and Midwest Food Banks. We have another program that they talked about today at the meeting that's going to move forward to help with reemployment as people come out of the situation and see how we can help them hire back some people beyond just what the payroll protection program handled. Aside from that, I know that, they're looking at how the county expenses have been impacted by COVID and ways to work with our sister government agencies and things like that. But it's been a little out of my pay grade, so I haven't been in all those conversations.
Thank you. Thank you. That's good information. Mr. Freitas, did you have any comments?
The only thing that I had a question on it was if it was discussed at all, maybe having the first half of the year continue doing virtual and then the second half of the year going into this combination plan. I don't know if there was any discussions on potentially continuing something like that where a lot of educators have really gotten a hang and comfortable. And I know there's a lot of educators that are also concerned about going back under the same conditions. So, since I think towards the latter part of the COVID situation, as it got closer to the summer, things got better. I felt like as I was talking to teachers, they were getting more comfortable. Kids were actually starting to participate. I'm just curious if there was any discussions, if maybe there was a continuation, so that way we can get a better idea if there's going to be a second wave of COVID as Florida cases are starting to increase or not.
There was a discussion. Right now, it's not what I would consider a front runner. And the main concern around that was parents need to get back to work. And we heard loudly and clearly from parents that they needed to be back in the workforce and that they did not have options, that many of them did not have options if their children were not back in school. So I think that carried a lot of weight thinking about that decision. And then when you looked at the governor's plan, now the headline was open at full capacity. And I think that was very misleading because a lot of people heard that or saw that headline and thought, oh, schools are going to open as normal, which is not quite the same as at capacity. And if you actually read the plan, you see that it was at capacity with a whole lot of modifications. But that's not a real simple headline, so it didn't quite get there. So I think a variety of models. They were presented, the models last week, and that was actually cut down from the original models that they had before the governor's plan came out. So while yes, I consider it very unlikely that we would do full virtual unless there was a major spike again and there was a big effort to close things down again.
Okay. Okay. Do they anticipate sending another survey out there as well to get another idea of how parents are feeling now, just to see if that non-English section that composes most of our Title I schools shifts?
Yes, there's been talk about another one. Once more of a decision has been made, I think then it'll go out with here's the plan, and that survey has not been designed yet, but I'm thinking it's going to be based on that plan, looking at, are you comfortable with the plan? Do you plan to send your child back based upon this model we're using?
Okay. And then what about before school and after school? Any discussions around what that would look like?
There have, I don't believe decisions have been made at that. I know that there was a meeting today with the YMCA about starting a summer program. I think they're going to try and do 4 weeks at Cypress Middle. And so I think that will give us some guidance on, how that goes in terms of before and after school. Again, I know a lot of parents rely on that very heavily, but I have not heard any specific conversation yet around that. I know it's been discussed. I just haven't been part of those discussions.
Okay. All right. That's perfect, because I was, again, going back to those Title I schools and that segment of non-English. I know that's another area that typically gets, a high level of before school and after school care. So
yes.
No, other than
Cindy,
that, I read through the presentation and, I have a 6th grader at home as well. And she said the same thing. She goes, I just don't know how I'm going to wear a mask all day in class. She goes, but
Right. Well, and right now that is not the recommendation. Right now it is not a requirement, and that could change. But based on a lot of things, the health department encourages them, but again, it's not requiring. But just feasibility, I think, as much as anything else. Yeah.
Cindy, this is Brian.
Yeah.
Brian again. I just have one more quick one that I came up with. What happens if an individual school has an outbreak? So it's not countywide, it's not school district wide, but what happens is there a plan in place? Is it 3 kids or three teachers or 5 or 10? Is there a plan for that type of an individual school outbreak?
I can't tell you details of that. Yes, there is, and it's with the and the reason I can't tell you details is because I don't know all of them. but I know that there's a plan because that was discussed and was even referenced back several years ago when we had SARS. We had a particular school that was closed for, I believe, a couple of weeks because of that. So we wouldn't shut down the whole district because of one school, but there would be a possibility based upon recommendations from the health department that we could shut down one if necessary. And again, that would definitely be done in collaboration with the health department in their recommendations. You still there, Brian? Did we lose you? Now we may have lost him. Okay, any other questions around that? Okay, so oh yes, Mr. Montrose.
Yeah, no, it's I just wanted to ask if there's been a increase in applications or interest in Lee Virtual since all this started.
Yes, indeed, there has. Yes, they've seen quite an increase already, and expect that there may be another increase once the final decision is made when parents say, okay, they really are coming back and I'm really not ready. So they're planning around that. Right now, the recommendation would be that if a student enrolls in Elite Virtual, that they stay in that for at least one semester. And then at the end of the semester could reevaluate whether they wanted to maintain that program or move back into the school setting. And there's discussion around how they would ensure that the child's seat was held at the home school if they chose to do that.
And has there been, like, I guess, the reallocation of teacher positions to reflect that?
That's an ongoing
Okay,
process right now. Mhm. Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. All right, so communication was talked about as one area that you might want to make some recommendations around. And I'm fine with that. Just want you to know that I know that there are a couple of other committees that are also making recommendations around communications. In terms of our strategic plan, if we wanted to look at achievement, possibly some recommendations around closing achievement gaps and how we might focus on that. I know that's a big part of the governor's plan and money that he has focused on that. So we might want to be thinking around that. Excuse me. And then in terms of processes, what are some metrics that might be really important for us to keep track of as we go through this opening and looking at how do we know if our processes are being effective, the reopening processes are being effective. And then of course, anything else that you want to concentrate on, but those are ones that came to mind.
I'll comment on achievement. That was one of the ones I was going to bring up earlier, because from listening to the testimony of the teachers that were describing their online learning, virtual learning, and the fact that some of them were testifying they were having trouble getting students to attend, I'm really questioning how much learning really has gone on with that concept. I mean, are we putting off reality here? Because I can't understand how a student that's not checking in with their teacher until the end of the week or Saturday when the teacher calls them or the guidance counselor calls them, I really struggle with that child to get any learning anything that past week. So I'm really wondering where we stand with achievement, and are we putting off the inevitable by not measuring these students as we go along?
Well, no, there were some measurements that were being done. I mean, they did have the regular exams that they would have during the school year. What we didn't have was the FSA, the standardized test. However, there were, excuse me, classroom measures that were being done. There is planning right now for doing an assessment right at the beginning of the school year to try and identify just that. So where are those gaps? Which students did not make the progress that was expected? And how are we going to attack that? Our academic team has really been looking at it and trying to decide how they're going to assess to begin with, and then how they're going to fill in, how they're really going to target those students to bring them back up to par once we do have that data. So it's a valid concern, and we're all worried about that as well. Do you have any suggestions around that? Anything that?
No, I really don't. I just wanted to bring it up because I'm looking through all these plans that we have, and they are outstanding. I mean, running this school district and running these classrooms has always been a challenge, especially when we have turnover of teachers. They're not getting paid enough, and now along comes this virus, and it's really throwing a curve and everything. And it's really not an easy thing to get your hands around and to manage. And there's so many inevitable things that could happen. Brian brought up what happens when someone gets sick. We just had a situation over here in the village yesterday. We only have 8 employees, but one person came in and they said they weren't feeling well. And by the way, I went and got tested on Saturday. So now everybody's scrambling. Geez, what do we do? Were we exposed? And, is the air conditioning system in this small building, pushing this virus around? And I mean, that's the kind of things that happen. And I think Brian brings a great point up. And none of us are going to have the answers for that. That's kind of, management by fire. You got to wait till it happens and make the best decisions that you can. Strategically, I mean, I went through all this material, And I mean, you really pretty much have all the I's dotted and T's crossed. You know, the cleaning of the classrooms, the buses, the bus trips, the dispatching of buses. There's been a lot of thought and excellent work that's gone into this. It's just going to be a real challenge to execute it, and I applaud you folks for taking this task on. And believe me, I'm the last one that's going to be a critiquer. I want to be one of the people that's to help get it fixed and maybe help you get funding, because I know from the Florida League of Cities, Scott Dudley, who's our public affairs person, we had a conference call last week, and we shouldn't be afraid to ask for more money because it's there. Well,
that's definitely going to come up with our recommendations, and any connections that you have there, we don't turn down money. And you're right, it's going to be a challenge from a lot of perspectives. Just when you think these children have not seen each other in months, and they're going to come back, and the first thing they want to do is, you know, hug their friends. And when I taught kindergarten for a long time, and you know, the first week of kindergarten, they don't know what a line is, much less how to stand 6 feet apart in one. And those young children love to love on you. I mean, you know, it was just a general rule, you didn't wear white on pizza or spaghetti days because you knew that, that you were going to be wearing red. And so how do you adjust to have children socially distancing and still building those strong relationships and helping them? You know, it's going to be very challenging all the way around.
One of the things I was impressed with, and I have a degree in education, although I only taught for a year, and I went into the corporate world, but I was shocked at the positive response of the parents during the epidemic when we had the graduation activities. I know Kathleen and Christine Patrica were there for that over in the parking lot. I thought maybe we'd have 10 or 12 parents showed up. I stopped counting at 150 cars, and they were all parents. And the support from the public, I think, was great. So I think people are getting the message that they have to be part of the solution. So I think we need to tap into that resource that we haven't really tapped into, because there's a lot of good, positive people out there that will help us along the way, I'm sure.
That's great. Thank you. Dr. Stork, did you have your hand back up?
I did. I wanted to just touch a little bit on what Bill was saying about achievement and focusing on achievement. And I'll probably say something maybe slightly controversial, but that's okay. So I'm curious to know if the Florida Department of Education has given any indication about the requirements for testing for next year.
No.
Okay.
And I asked that today. That's why I'm fairly certain the answer is still no. But,
okay, because this is the controversial part of my conversation, which is I think, you know, most of us that have been in education for any bit of time, and probably lots of people who aren't in education, understand that measuring achievement doesn't always have to be done a certain way. And so there's a holistic way that we can measure student achievement and document that beyond what's currently required by the state, well, at least traditionally required by the state, and maybe next year it won't be. So I was wondering if there's been any conversation about how we assess student achievement or evaluate student achievement, maybe in other ways besides standardized testing, if that's not a requirement for next year.
That, I think that would be a great recommendation to come out of this committee around that. Because right now we don't know if school grade is going to be counted next year or not. We don't know, because of that, we don't know about VAM. There were questions around, okay, so if I've been exposed and I have to quarantine for 2 weeks, and then maybe, you know, 3 months later or 2 months later, I'm exposed again, I have to quarantine for 2 weeks. Am I still going to be expected to maintain a VAM score? You know, so there are a lot of questions around what are those state expectations are going to be, and right now we just don't know.
Okay.
Good questions though. Mr. Montrose?
Yeah, are they finding any useful data from, you know, now we're using a lot more of the online resources like iReady, Boom Cards and all. Are they finding any useful data from those programs?
I believe so, but our meetings have been so focused around reopening that I haven't looked at that data yet. I'm sure our academic team has. But that's something.
Call from Poverty FM.
Don't know where that call is coming from. But I will find out about that. I know that they've been looking at the data. I just haven't seen it.
Okay.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about ways possibly to think about some recommendations around assessment, some recommendations around looking for additional funding. So let's talk about the communication. What types of recommendations, what things are you thinking around the communication plan?
I think if that's something that's already being discussed in several other committees, then maybe that's not something we should focus on, except to say that I do think that maybe taking a good look at the difference between the English speakers and people who English is not their native language. There was such a big difference between, you know, the way they answered those survey questions that perhaps it might be considered that that is related to communicating, you know, what the district's plans are or what they're doing right now in order to address some of the unknowns. So that's just my only, I don't think it's a recommendation. It's more of, is this something that is being looked at?
Yes, and you know, we've tried to, and we don't know the answers. I'm telling you up front, none of this has any research behind it. We were just trying to brainstorm, why is there such a big difference? And one of the things that we think may be part of that is that a lot of our non-English speaking families, they have a lot more of an extended family relationship. And a lot of times they have more people who live in the home. And so they may be cautious about exposing grandparents that are in the home, and they're not willing to take that chance. Part of it may be just not getting as much information out there. Again, it was a smaller sample, but still there were over 1,000. I'm thinking around 1,200 responses that were in the non-English language survey. So it may not be a huge response rate, but it's a good number, and there was a striking difference between the two. So it definitely bears some additional research and to see if we can find out what those reservations really are.
And my last, this would be a recommendation, and obviously I'd like to put it out there for the people on the committee to see what they think, but it would be my recommendation that if the state is not going to require students to take the FSA next year, that the district look at more holistic methods of evaluating student achievement.
Okay, so we have a recommendation. Do we have discussion around that?
Just that I agree fully.
Yeah, I agree with that as well.
Yeah, I agree also.
Okay, so let's go ahead and
Yeah, you're nobody. Shut up.
Stop. I'm talking.
and we will
So-
take a quick vote on that. So I see, I can't see all faces because we have a couple of people so I can't see their hands. So I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor of making the recommendation that if FSA is not required for our students this year, that the district consider using more holistic methods of assessment to determine achievement progress. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
So was that an aye in favor or an aye opposed? That last one.
Aye in favor.
Thank you. Okay, any opposed? No. Okay, so Julie, if you will work on the wording that we'll put that one forward. Okay, we had another recommendation from Mr. Ribble. Would you like to put your recommendation into a couple of sentences for us?
Geez. You mean as far as the measurement goes?
In terms of looking for funding.
Oh, okay, yeah. I make a recommendation that we seek the sources from the state and possibly through the federal government, through the Florida League of Cities for additional funding.
Okay, you've heard the recommendation. Any discussion?
I would agree. Is there anything that we can also find out to get funding for increase in staff? So for, you know, additional teacher support that we might need for ESC students, especially if there is a higher level of non-English speaking parents out there that we don't know if they're going to be willing to send their kids to school or not.
Okay. Excuse me, Julie, could you read back what Mr. Ribble said? Did you have time to write that?
My draft right now said seek resources from the state and the federal government for additional funding to cover district costs.
Okay, and so I'm hearing we might want to add including possible funds for hiring additional teachers to meet the needs of students. Does that kind of sum up what you said, Lucinda?
Yes, and I would say, you know, specifically those low-income schools, Title I schools that we might have, where we might need some additional support for, you know, for those students. I mean, because we don't know if a lot of them are going with their parents not wanting them to be in school. We don't know what that support system is going to look like. Normally, we have those resources in the you know, going from classroom to classroom, but we may not have that virtually, right?
Right. So including sources for additional personnel, particularly to support Title I and other and low-income students.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Any other discussion?
Let me ask Kathleen before we close the motion on that one, because we just added a shopping list. Mine was open that we could add all kinds of things to. Now we're getting into a kind of an ask for a specific area, and there's nothing wrong with that. But is there other areas that we have a need for as well? Do we want to increase our shopping list? In other words, to justify our request?
Yeah, well, I guess that's a good point. Maybe we should keep it more open, so that way there is no shopping request, right? We just kind of keep it. Give us what you can give us.
Yeah, so you know, you start with Bill's statement, and I think you say it. For example, additional classroom resources, whether it's material or bodies or whatever. For example, you know, whatever, and then, but not limited to these things.
And perhaps if we put in support of the district strategic plan, that's pretty open.
Yeah, that covers everything.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm sorry, Julie, to put you on the spot. Can you read that to us? And instead of with students, we'll just put at the end in support of, thank you.
Seek resources from the state and the federal government for additional funding to cover costs of additional classroom resources in support of the district strategic plan.
Yeah, can we add that piece about the Florida League of Cities? And I'll tell you why I bring that up. You folks don't even have a clue how much we spend in dues to the Florida League of Cities. We spend a ton of money, and then all these fees to be involved in the mayors. I got to pay $800 for that, and there's a lot of fees. So there's a lot of things that we pay for, and there's very little services that we get back, except when it's time to ask for monies. And they are professionals, and they're good. I'm not whining, I'm not crying about that they're not a good value, but they're only a value if we put them to task to work for us. And we've been having these conference calls with them every Monday at 10 o'clock, and they're discussing some of these issues. So it'd be a shame not to do an ask and come up with a letter that I could give Scott Dudley, and then he passes that on through our state contacts. And of course, the state right now with a $93 billion budget, they're concerned about not having monies to fund all the things they need, but they get their money from the feds. So this is a type of thing where they're going to go to their federal folks and get some of these funds that supposedly is available for us.
Mrs. Morgan.
Cindy, yeah, do you know if Finance Advisory has met or if they're meeting soon?
I don't know. I can pull it up over here while we're talking. I can pull up the schedule and see if it's up there.
But in addition to bringing these comments to the superintendent and to Amy Desamore, if the finance committee, advisory committee is meeting, that would be right up their alley.
Yes, sure would.
So that's a great suggestion, Bill.
If I can help, let me know.
Yeah, yeah, you're going to be our point person. So we're going to refer everybody to you.
That's right.
Fine.
We'll just call you the money guy.
Yeah, there you go.
No,
Okay, one more time, Julie, with the Florida League of Cities included.
Okay. Seek resources from the state, the Florida League of Cities, and the federal government for additional funding to cover costs for additional classroom resources in support of the district's strategic plan.
Okay.
yeah, that's good.
Great. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you. So we now have 2 recommendations going forward. So any other recommendations you'd like to consider around communications or other areas? Mrs. Morgan.
So let me just ask you all, you know, if student achievement is our #1 goal, and we know that there are certain categories of students that for whom learning loss will probably be significant, do you believe that the district should start with those students and build their plan from those students, dedicating the resources they have to make certain that those who are at greatest risk get the resources they need, and then build the rest of the academic program on top of that? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I would concur, because that kind of still aligns with that vision and that goal, because if we get to a point where those students are even further behind of that vision, then that gets us a little bit further behind of the overall goal.
I think one of the biggest challenges for that is, you know, there's only so much money in the pie, right? So if you take out a certain amount specifically targeted for students who need those resources, then will other students fall behind as a result? So
yeah, no, that's why I asked the question, because as the task force initially talked about it, perhaps K-6, everybody in school. Well, if it's everybody in school and you can't accommodate all of the children in one classroom, then you're going to need more classrooms. More classrooms means more teachers. And where do those teachers come from? So that's why, you know, I ask, it's, you know, I'm just curious as to what your reaction is. And I do agree that if the elementary kids and the ELL and the ESE kids get first dibs on teacher resources, that means middle school and high school maybe gets different resources, and it has to be made up in a different way, and the program has to be put together in a different way, because we don't have the teacher resources, the bodies at the upper levels. I don't know. I'm just curious, throwing it out for conversation.
Yeah, and I think what if something like that might look like expanding tutoring? So, you know, I don't know if that's something that could be discussed, because that could be provided to anyone, no matter what their situation is, and probable that those that need the additional assistance and guidance are going to use that tutoring much more than those that don't need it. So again, I'm just kind of throwing that out there, because I know that's not something that, you know, I know, for example, my daughter, she had more difficult time in math, and her teacher was amazing. And every morning she would have a block, and it was specifically in the morning before school, and she would be able to go in there and get the assistance and guidance when she needed it available. And that could be, you know, again, part of our request for additional resources for, I mean, just kind of throwing it out there is something that everybody can use. And I think that no matter where you are, if you need that extra guidance, but I know that's not typically in the budget. Is okay, now we're gonna, have this amount of staff specifically for those students that are struggling.
A great idea.
So I might be hearing a recommendation here around looking for opportunities to provide additional tutoring to students at all levels that are in need.
Yes, that I would love to throw that out there as a recommendation.
Did I word that in a way that made sense to you?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a recommendation that the district explore opportunities for tutoring for students at all levels who are in need of additional assistance.
I like the idea of thinking about the word tutoring broadly, though, instead of maybe just a traditional way we think about tutoring. I don't think that maybe doesn't have to be in the motion necessarily, but if we all kind of agree that there could be sort of creative ways that we're offering tutoring, not just, there could be online tutoring, there could be staff dedicated specifically to doing tutoring in certain subject areas, that kind of thing.
Yes, that makes sense to me as well. That we're not strictly talking about paying someone to come in and tutor students, but looking at different options and opportunities.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and this is Warren, and I would think that, I know that you're open, Mrs. Morgan, to all kinds of options, but one of the things that my daughter's been involved in some peer mentoring programs in her middle school and things like that. And so if we could really activate that, she's actually gained a lot by working with those that need the assistance that she can offer, and it supplements what you're having to pay for, and maybe make that a little bit more robust and help the students help each other, something like that, and focus on it in addition to bringing in additional resources that are funded. Just a thought on the whole mentoring, tutoring type of discussion. You've got, students that are capable and benefit from helping those that need the help.
Yeah, we could have, that's a great idea, Warren. We could even, you could have high school students get service hours for doing online tutoring sessions, specific subjects, specific areas. So.
Yeah, that's where my mind was going to. I mean, you could even go and expand it to a virtual, kind of social group, even if you wanted to, because I know some of these kids are missing that social interaction. If you wanted to even bring that, to a broader scale.
Great. So
yeah, and I like the idea of the getting the credit for that. I know they get a lot of the community service credit for working out in the community, but in a time like this, if you can focus some of those hours inward to help the system that they're a part of, in a time like this, not that the other external ones out in the community don't benefit from it, but we really need to circle the wagons, I guess is a good way to put it, maybe, and help each other out that way. And so I like the whole idea.
We also have, as part of our strategic plan, the business and community partnerships. I know Lee County has a lot of volunteers, and maybe people would be willing to do online tutoring sessions in their area of expertise. So that could be another avenue for exploring tutoring without having to dig into the budget.
yeah. So maybe we need to add there. Julie, will you read back what we have so far, please?
Explore opportunities to provide tutoring to students at all levels that are in need of assistance.
Okay, so maybe something along the lines of including or recommend that alternative types of tutoring be explored, such as online tutoring, mentoring, peer tutoring, etc. Does that cover the discussion that we just had?
I think so.
Okay. All right. So with that added, all in favor of that recommendation, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Boy, we're on a roll. Okay, thank you. So the only other topic that I heard before was communications, and particularly in relation to the families that don't speak English. They may have it as a second language. So Michelle or Lucinda, either one, did you have a recommendation around that related to communications?
I don't really,
I apologize.
especially Cindy, since you said that other committees are more focused on that, and I'm sure DAC is probably taking a good look at that too. So I'm happy to, you know, feed to them on that one.
DAC is looking at it. Equity Diversity Committee, I know, is looking at it specifically.
Okay, so I'm happy to let them continue to do that. We have 3 really good recommendations, I believe.
Okay, and Mrs. Morgan, the Finance Committee is actually meeting tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
So good timing. So we can get
Yeah,
that information to their liaison.
Great.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion, questions? We have, the sun is in my eyes. It looks like it's about 10 after, I think. But any other recommendations before we move to go to the order? Okay.
The only, I guess, question I have, and I don't know if this is even an area that we would talk about in our group, is have there been conversations on what it looks like if we get to a point where kids do have a lot of like social interaction? What is, I mean, is there going to be any kind of, you know, discipline around that or no?
I haven't heard any discussion around that. I don't think in terms of discipline, I think it would be a reminder of, you know, this is the expectation, and really it's going to be up to teachers to maintain that within the classrooms. And I'm sure that there will be people in the hallways. There's been talk about putting markers in the hallway and, you know, one directional travel. It's kind of like when you go into a lot of stores now.
Or yeah, Publix.
I don't know. I've been ordering. I haven't been into a Publix in 8 weeks. I'm loving it.
Oh my word.
We have some high risk people in our family, so we've been very careful. So it's, but I'm getting spoiled. So just a reminder that tomorrow from 4 to 6 is the next task force meeting, and it will be live streamed on YouTube. So if you're interested in watching that, and if you're not available at that time and want to watch it later, it will be posted on YouTube as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Stork for good of the order.
Thanks, Cindy. Does anybody have anything for the good of the order? Oh my goodness, silence.
Can I request that you folks send that link out for tomorrow for that 4 o'clock?
There's not a link for it, but if you go to YouTube and register for the Lee County channel, it will remind you that it's coming up.
Okay.
Okay, so anybody else? All right, so now I would just like to entertain a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Thanks, Dave. Second?
Oh, I'll second. I wanted to stay for another hour, but I'll second.
Well, you can stay, but thank you all very much. Good meeting, and appreciate the recommendations, and we will move forward with those.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next tentative meeting is July 15th, correct? July 15th. So see you then.
Okay.
All right, see you then.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay.